We are finally back in the shop. It is a little crowded post-hurricane, but as you can see, the Fastback is back out front and center, and it is uncovered, and we are picking back up on finalizing the wiring. So, welcome to another episode of Low Tech Garage. For those that are new to the channel, thank you for joining. If you have come this way because of the Mustang content, you are in the right place at the right time. We are just a few episodes away from getting the car back on the road for the first time in nearly 10 years. And with this, we are going to be getting the car, once it's running, up on the lift behind me. And I want to show you all the awesome stuff underneath, what I have done, and what I've really worked on for nearly a decade to make this my dream Mustang. And if you're viewing this because of the Jaguar content or any of the other car content I've put out there, please still consider subscribing. There is tons more of that to come. But I am really pushing on the Mustang because I have some other plans for the shop and workspace coming up as we roll into the new year. And my life will be so much easier if the Mustang can move under its own power. We can get out in these winter months in Florida and really shake down the car to see how it behaves, get any little kinks and bugs out, and we can make some moves for the channel for everyone here in the near future. Well, we got a fun one today. This is a 1965 Shelby GT350 gauge pod. And the reason I'm working on this is because obviously I have my full instrumentation. I switched over to autometer gauges, but I need a tack and I also need a boost gauge to make sure that I am not getting too crazy in the boost. In my last video you may have seen I mentioned that I may have gone a little overkill with the supercharger, so I really want to make sure the boost kind of stays in check. And this gauge pod was used during that time period in 1965, and it did house the tack, and I believe it had maybe like a clock in there as well. And so I'm repurposing this. I'm gonna have my boost gauge in there, and I'm gonna move my tack from down on the column where I used to keep it up into this pod too, so that I can see it. So with that, let's get started. I had it just taped up to the dash so it could kind of shape to it a little bit. But we got to take this gauge pod off. Like I said, it was just kind of taped up there. And we got to start prepping to put these autometer gauges in here to get one step closer to having all the instrumentation in the car so we can get all the wiring done. And like I said, this thing's just taped on here. Really wanted to see how it would fit. Peel that guy off, and out she comes. And honestly, some people have opinions about these and the quality, but it seems to be on par with any of the other gauge pods that I've used in the past. These little dimples are kind of the centering hole where it can run a drill through. I'm gonna have to use both hands here to cut this out. I'll see if I can get something to document that, but otherwise I'll be back in a minute once I've got these holes drilled out and we can see how these gauges fit. Well, as promised, I am back on the 1965 Mustang Fastback today, and the focus for today is going to be working on the instrument cluster and just general instrumentation to get that finalized and properly put in the dash, just to check off one last thing as we work towards the car coming to completion. And with that, I've been able to test all the gauges for the most part and make sure that they basically work. And so I'm going to work on the loom to make it permanent and protected. And unfortunately, I found that to kind of get my new couple of new gauges in, I'm gonna have to take the car more apart again. But I figured I could show you what I'm working on as far as those new gauges and why I decided to do that. And then you can come along with me today to get these gauges hopefully finally installed and get us one step closer to having this car on the road. All right, so also gonna work on getting this re-loomed. I did actually have this done before, but as I went through the whole car, rewired everything, I took it all apart just so I could make sure everything works as anticipated. And I'm pleased to report it does. So let's get some loom on this. and get it ready so it can be its own standalone unit that can be plugged into the dash. All right, well, here we are with a little progress check-in on the instrument cluster. So what you can see here is I've got this nice loom that is covered all over the harness. It's a really nice split loom, kind of made out of nylon, and I've got everything nicely wrapped. These pigtails go into the factory harness, and they will push into the factory connectors and give me connection to the gauge inputs. And then over here, these are going to be the sockets that I'm using to create a harness that'll plug in to the dash as well. Right now I just have these wires, which are going to need cutting down, repinning, and putting into that connector. So we have a really nice lumen harness to plug straight into the dash. And then a sneak peek of what we got going on here. This is a 65 GT350 gauge cluster, and you'll see that I have my tack and a boost gauge mounted there. And I'm really excited about this solution because it is a kind of OEM gauge cluster. I didn't really want something stuck on the A-pillar. And so at a glance, it kind of looks like that GT350 throwback. But obviously I have some other gauges and more newer gauges in there. But with that, I need to basically pull the whole dash pad out and make some modifications to it to mount it permanently and have some space to run all the electronics and sensors through the dash, and then get it all reinstalled. So I'm gonna start here by actually pulling the dash out so I can have everything apart, and then we'll work on looming everything and start going down the path of putting this back together once and for all. A little bit of fun. Some of you may know that I may have done that before because it didn't take too long to get that out. But let me show you what I'm working with here. So here's the dash pad, and then above, here's a better look at the gauge pod that I'll be installing. And basically, if I flip this over, I gotta get some wires and stuff from here. Basically, let's see where I started a pilot hole through here, but let me show you where it gets a little tricky. So here you find me inside the car, and basically we've got this steel structure, and basically you can see where I've managed to scrape a little bit with the drill bit to mark it. This is where that hole's landing. So basically I need to make a slight hole in the steel structure here, just big enough that I can run my cables through for the instruments. Let's bust out the drill and see if we can do that. We're gonna walk around here, and I think I've shared a little bit of the mess of wiring in here, but don't worry, I'll pretend that I know what everything does. And we will come inside, and I think the eagle eye viewers will notice I have stripped the entire dash down now. Before, we did have the dash pad and a few other things here, but I stripped it all out, and really the reason for that is we come in, are these gauges at the top. So we have awesome autometer tack with shift light and a boost gauge that I wanted to mount up here on the dash using a 65 Shelby gauge pod. And to do that, I had to drill a little hole in the dash frame to run all the wires and vacuum lines through. And then equally, I needed to make sure that all the wiring could come into the gauge cluster area, and I could basically route it the way I wanted before putting the cluster in. Then as we pan over here, you'll see that this is a 65 Mustang instrument cluster. But as we get closer, instead of the factory gauges, I have the matching autometer gauges behind the bezel so that I can get an accurate reading on all the outputs from the engine and make sure that, you know, with the power we're making, the things such as oil pressure and, you know, all the other things, voltage, water, etc., are where they need to be, and we can take care of this awesome engine while having a lot of fun with it. All right, well, we are back in the car, and you guys will see I have the dash pad in now. And right here is the vacuum line for the boost gauge. So this is just kind of in as a trial fit. We want to make sure that the wiring will go through the dash pad, and then we can put the gauge pod on top with the couple gauges that are going to sit up here. Then down here, just added some bullet connectors. These are basically the ground, the power, and the lights for the gauges as well. And so we're going to basically run those signal wires in through the hole here. They'll come out under the dash. And then the last one we've got, this is the tach signal cable right here. So we'll pin this in as well. And that should get us pretty much what we need. So still pretty messy here, but nice to see the dash pad on, a step in the right direction. And I will say, thanks for bearing with me with this. Some of my gear seems to be hiding from me, so I don't have my tripod today. So a little less time lapse with the filming, but I'm doing my best to take a pause and show you what I'm doing each step of the way, so you can see where I started today, where we get to. Really my goal is that hopefully we can have all the gauges basically mounted up where they're gonna go. Knowing this project is probably not gonna be the final time, but they'll all be in there. We can test all the electrical connections and make sure that all the instrument lights work. And equally when we apply power to the car with the cluster in, that at least we see the gauges wake up as such, so the needles will move to their baseline. So that's really the goal for this video. I think if we get there, that's great progress. Basically, the instruments are tied into the car's main harness, and then they bridge across to the standalone system for the inputs off the engine. So having that little bridge to both systems is a huge milestone. And then the next video, we're going to work on getting the Holley system properly wired up now that I've got it all figured out. So just wanted to share that. I'm going to jump back in. I'm going to work on the gauge clusters here, and then we'll be on to the next thing. All right, so another update. Looks worse than the last one. Got the dash pad tilted forward, and if we come in here, I've had to cut quite the hole in the dash pad. It's pretty much unavoidable with the gauge pod I'm putting in. I was able to get a nice final coat of dye on the gauge pod so it matches the dash pad pretty nicely. And I'm just working on feeding all the wires and everything down into and behind the dash. So I'm gonna finish that up, and I think hopefully the result will look pretty good. So bear with me here a couple minutes and I'll be right back. All right, well, that was definitely some wrestling, and you might tell I am sweaty again. It might almost be November. It is still hot as anything here in Florida. But let me show you what I've got done. I am super thrilled to see this step because it's the first time that I've properly had the gauge pod, which I think I mentioned is the 65 Shelby period correct gauge pod, mounted on the dash. I do not have the screws in it yet that finally locate it. I'm going to do that as the very last step once I'm pleased with everything else. But this is a huge step in the right direction, and I want to share it with you guys. And here we are. So, gauge pod is roughly mounted, and as you can see, we have our boost gauge, tach, and shift light mounted. So this will all get adjusted. You can see it's a little wonky right now, and like I said, I'll put a couple screws in, but this is a huge step forward. I'm gonna get this all plugged in behind the dash, and And then we're going to migrate over here and do a test fit with the gauge cluster as well. And assuming that works, there's a lot of trim that basically goes up on the top of the dash pad to hold all that in. Speaker, grill, some stainless trim under here. Lots of little intricate bits and pieces to make this a finished dash, but that's what we're working towards. All right, progress update. So, cluster is basically in. I was making sure all the little spring clips and stuff I bought fit. There's one that has a little fiddling to do, but it's in. And now you get a better idea of the tack and boost gauge. So those are in. I'm gonna work, just so you can see here, this is all low. I'm gonna put the little stainless trim up here because this is bugging me, and I think I'm at a point where at least the pad can probably stay up here for now. So I'm gonna work on that, and then I've got something pretty cool to show you guys. All right, well, this is where we've landed. So we have the dash pad mounted back up. We have the Shelby cluster, boost, tack, shift light. And we come down here and we have the 65 gauge cluster by housing all the auto meter gauges. And now I want to show you guys this. Much more legible than 60s gauges. Perfect for driving at night. Something I've admittedly been working on to get working properly for years. And just to give you all a glimpse again from a bit more of the driver perspective, but I am super, super excited. All right, well, that was some major progress. Super excited where I've landed for today. When I get back over here tomorrow, I'm gonna be working on the last pieces of the dash, so let me show you what that's gonna be. So excuse the reflection, but you can see we got the speaker here. So I've gotta get that screwed in, and then there's the speaker grill that's gonna go in here for now. And then there's equally, and it's hard to tell, there's steel trim that runs all the way along the dash on the inside to basically hold the dash pad in. And that's always fun and tedious, so I'm saving that for tomorrow. Oh yeah, and you can see the little divots in the back of the gauge pod. I need to drill 2 small holes, one here, one there, and then put some screws to anchor the pod into the dash pad permanently. I'll tell you what, this is a huge milestone. Getting this dash back together is massive. I'm super excited. There are a few little things here and there, but fundamentally I have a full set of instrumentation, which means we can get on to finally wiring in the Holly permanently, and we'll be super, super close to that first drive. Okay, well, it's the next day, and it is time to get that speaker screwed into the dash and then the steel trim along the back of the dash as well. Like I said, I was holding off on doing that till today so I can have a fresh set of eyes and hands and some patience, because usually this takes a while, especially aligning the screws that go through the steel trim and into really the back of the dash pad and dash. So let me grab those parts and we're gonna get started. This is one of the trims, and I thought I'd show you why it is tedious. You see these standoffs that rest up against basically the base of the windshield. And you got this tiny little hole with a really long screw that has to go through the standoff and then into a little hole in the back of the dash. And I think there are about 7 of these, so it definitely takes some time, but all part of the process. You know what? Maybe I'll do myself a favor and actually clean this windshield so I can actually see what I'm trying to work on at the bottom of the dash while we're doing this as well. I think this is gonna make my life a whole lot easier. I should definitely have done that about a year ago. I can actually see what I'm doing now. Got a little ahead of myself. I need to put a couple screws in the dash speaker, and then actually the speaker grill goes in first. I kind of almost tucks under where the wraparound trim goes. So let me show you kind of where I am with that and what's going on, and then we'll be ready to put that dash trim in as well. And you can see it resting on the dash here. This is the speaker and defrost grill. You can kind of see the speaker. I cleaned it, and now the reflection's even better. But there are some screws in the front holes on it just to locate it in place as well. To be honest with you guys, with the setup I've got, I don't know that there's going to be much music that I'm listening to, but then nonetheless, it's nice to have a radio in the car. Well, that went rather quickly too. It's just the 2 screws here. Again, excuse the reflection, but we have the defroster and speaker grill in, and there's no more avoiding it. We have to do the dash trim. So step 1 is really tuck this piece of the dash pad up under the window. Probably should have done a better job of that before we started, but here we are. Sorry if this is a little wobbly for you guys, but it seems to be tucking in most of the way. Probably need to get a little tool just for this corner piece to press it down and under, and I'll do the same on the other side. Let's start this fun. So it kind of just slides down in here to start with, and then the fun is lining all these holes up. I think I'm gonna go get the other half and get it rested up here too, so we can just get as many of the screws started as possible before cranking everything down and getting this in its final resting place. Well, I can't believe I'm saying this, but the dash is back together. So let me show you what we've got and where we're going to be wrapping things up for the day. So at a glance, it doesn't look too much different, but all the trim on the top is complete. So now we have the steel trim that goes up against the window seal and holds the dash pad in, the speaker and the defroster and speaker grill all along the top here, and this is in nice and permanently. So that's where we're gonna wrap this video, but on the next episode, what are we gonna be focusing on so you guys know what's coming? That is going to be getting center console in. That's gonna house the Sniper EFI touchscreen display that has all the readouts and dials of what the engine is doing from a digital perspective. And I'm also gonna put the stereo in as well. And really, once we get that done, that is completing the entire dash section. And all we have left is to finalize the Holley wiring. Like I said, I have had the car all wired up and working properly already. So this is the proper final wire in, and then the interior can go back in the car for good. And I cannot believe I am even saying that. Just a quick little glimpse, but the console is hiding down over here. And my stereo is right here. It's funny, this thing was basically top of the line when I got the car, and it's probably about as good as a brick now. But I'm gonna be putting it in so at least I can listen to some music. And here's the Sniper EFI display that will be tucked nicely in the console where I can still read it. But it can equally be hidden out of sight as well if I feel like it. So thank you all so much for watching. I know doing wiring and electrics is maybe not always the most interesting, and it's certainly not the easiest to film, but I hope you see the progress that I've made in this episode, and I feel so excited that we are back at this point. We have the dash lights working, they're hardwired into the dash, and we are super, super close to our first test drive. So if you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps me out. It allows me to continue to bring this content to you. Like you know, I'm just getting over all the hurricanes that came through here in Florida, so I will be back on a much more frequent cycle as far as putting content out. It will be a little more focused on the Mustang in the next few episodes, but do not worry, there's Jag content coming. I also have a little surprise as far as another member of the garage that has been kind of floating around in the background that I will introduce in the next few episodes as well. But that does not mean anything's leaving. It just means more content coming to you, and I hope you all enjoy it. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.